Kimberly, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. For the benefit of our audience, Kimberly Cook is a divorce and family attorney, a certified mediator, and divorce coach. She's the founder of Grown Girl Divorce, a divorce resource company, and the founder and principal mediator of Dovetail Conflict Resolution, a divorce and family mediation firm. Prior to starting her companies, Kimberly was a divorce litigator at one of the country's largest divorce firms, and she was amazing. Kimberly is a graduate of Spelman College and the Catholic University of America Law School, and you can also hear her as the host of the Grown Girl Divorce podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Kimberly.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation and to be a part of today's, education learning process.
Well, it's so important to talk about the cost of divorce. I think that one of the things that really holds a lot of people back from filing divorce sooner, even when they know they are in a marriage that needs to end, is the cost. And being an attorney, you know that legal fees are the biggest driver of that. And so I want to talk about how to not let your divorce bankrupt you. How can you save money on legal fees? And you've been there, done that. And so I want to ask you, can you really, truly save money on legal fees in a divorce?
Absolutely. And here's the thing. I think that people have a lot of trepidation when it comes to engaging in the process because we hear so many things about it's going to be so expensive and it's going to cost me everything and more. And it can, but it doesn't have to. But you have to be intentional. You have to be smart. And you really have to kind of take a step back before you jump into the process to really make sure that you don't end up throwing what I call good money after bad, because that's how we end up going bankrupt on our fees.
What I think is so difficult about divorce is that nearly everyone who gets a divorce has no experience with the legal system. They don't know about attorney costs. They don't know about retainers. They don't know what to expect. And so when we talk about being intentional and being in control of your divorce process, unless people get educated about what's possible, it's really hard to have that control. And so I'm so excited to talk today. And one of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for our conversation was hourly billing rates. Right? Yep. Most attorneys these days will charge by the hour. When it comes to hourly fees, everyone gets really focused on the hourly rate. And I wanted to ask you, is it really about the hourly rate? Is the hourly rate meaningful? What should we be looking out for in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question. But let's step back for a second because you made a very good point in this lead up in saying, people have so many questions and don't really understand kind of even the basics. So let's start with the basics. When we think about the retainer, right? We think about this is the amount of money that the lawyer is asking to start the engagement between the client and the lawyer. Generally, you want to think of that as your kind of deposit. This is the set aside amount that is then billed against at the hourly rate. So when we think about, okay, I've now paid a retainer, the lawyer, instead of constantly saying, hey, I need this amount of money so that I can work on this pleading, or I need this amount of money so that I can go into court, they draw against the retainer at whatever their hourly rate. Here's what's really important to understand about the hourly rate. An hourly rate is often determined by a certain set of circumstances. So an hourly rate that may be very expensive if you live in Georgia may actually be the average rate if you live in New York or Chicago or California. Location is important when we think about billable hourly rates. The same is true for the size of the firm that you're working for. So it's important to know that if you've decided I'm going to work with a big firm, the hourly rates might be larger or higher because they have greater resources, they have greater overhead. That may be different than working with a solo practitioner or somebody who has 2 or 3 lawyers at their firm. So I don't let people get too attached to the idea of I'm working with a lawyer that charges $800 an hour, because while in New York or Chicago, that might be, in fact, the average hourly rate. Whereas, say, if you were in Alabama, $800 an hour for an hourly rate may be the outlier. So you want to make sure that you consider all of the circumstances when asking the lawyer, what is your hourly rate? Second part of the asking about the hourly rate, you want to understand what the hourly rates are for anybody who's going to be working on your case. So if you retain a lawyer and you're in a meeting with them, you want to make sure to ask, are you the only lawyer who is going to be billing against the retainer? But here's the important piece of that. While they may be the only lawyer, they may not be the only person with a billable rate against your retainer. Paralegals, certain law clerks, and other staff members may also be billing against at an hourly rate. So it's very important that you understand anybody who is drawing down on the retainer may have an hourly rate based on the work that they are doing. In the simplest way to think about it, if I'm the partner on your case and my hourly rate is $500 an hour, but in the meeting, there's also a paralegal and she's billing at $200 an hour, you want to make sure that you're clear about, now I have a meeting where it's $700 an hour that's being billed against the retainer, or how does it work when we have professionals from the same firm working together in a meeting or on my case? So understanding the hourly rate is both important, but it's going to help you save money because you're going to know what's being billed against what.
And I think it's really difficult sometimes to wrap your arms around if you haven't been in the legal space before. That $700 an hour meeting sounds really, really painful. And someone's probably thinking to themselves, why do I want that $200 an hour paralegal sitting there and charging me for that hour-long meeting? And the answer from me, as someone who, is an expert witness who sits in some of these meetings, is it actually might be cheaper to pay that $200 than to later on have that paralegal try to play catch up, try to understand what happened during that meeting, try to perform some work when that paralegal isn't fully informed about what the intention was or what was discussed during the meeting. And so it can be really beneficial to spend that money, even though it feels painful on the front end.
Absolutely. But this is why we want to ask good questions, right? We want to understand, how does my lawyer bill? How does their firm bill, and who all are billing and for what? Again, the idea is to keep in mind that this is a business, right? You're hiring a professional who is providing a service, and that service does come at a cost. But the way for you to get out ahead of some of those costs are to really understand how they are actually applied and what's being charged when, so that as you're going through your bill, you can start highlighting or asking good questions about, why are we charging this for this when we didn't charge it over here? It's really, really going to help you to save money when you know what you're looking for and you have an understanding of how the money that you are putting out is being used.
But Kimberly, you're my divorce attorney, and every time I send you an email, I get billed for a half hour of your time. And it seems like I'm sending you a short email and you're responding to me with a short little paragraph that's 3 or 4 sentences. And now I've been billed a half hour. I don't understand why that happens.
Oh man. So here's the thing. In your engagement agreement, what you want to look for are the time increments for your billing, because it might be that the minimum billing time increment for your attorney or the paralegal, it might be 30 minutes. So that's whether they send one line or whether they actually spent the full 30 minutes. So what you want to look for in your engagement agreement is, what is the time, the minimum time in the increments that are being billed? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 7 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Emails are great and often the way to save money, because you can get oftentimes a lot more information than you can in a phone call for a lot less time. But here's the other thing to know. While we sometimes think, well, that email seems very short, keep in mind it is possible that the lawyer had to go and look up some information, or they had to kind of circle back to information that they've already explained, or to remind you of certain things. And then here's the tricky one. And this is where a lot of people spend a lot of money and they don't realize it. Make sure that you're asking questions of your lawyer that are law related. They're not your therapist. They're not your divorce coach. They're not your forensic accountant. And while, yes, they are hired to help you and to help you through this process, you are being billed. They are your lawyer. And so if they are constantly responding to emails or phone calls to questions that are not really law related, you are going to be charged at whatever their rate is. So make sure you're using the right professionals for the right thing. That's why we want to make sure that you have a good team, have a good therapist, help them and allow them to help you work through the emotional stuff, and stick to the legal stuff for your lawyer as much as you can.
Wonderful advice. What's the biggest mistake that people make when hiring a divorce attorney?
They don't consider what they really can afford. And here's what happens, right? Most of the time, people in a divorce are so overwhelmed, they're so emotional that they call their girlfriend or their neighbor, or they're talking to their therapist. And the therapist or friend says, call this person. Here's a lawyer for you. I've heard great things about them, or they did my divorce. And so most people then say, great, fine, I'm just going to use them because they got good reviews and I've met with them and they seemed fine. But they didn't consider, can I really afford to work with this person? And so what happens, they jump into a contractual relationship because that's what it is, and they can't afford it. And so it's really, really hard to kind of dial that back, because now you've connected with somebody, you feel like we've got this great relationship going, and before you know it, you're $10, $15, $20, $50,000 down the road, and you're so stressed and overwhelmed because you really can't afford it. So the biggest mistake that one can make is to sign up with or engage a lawyer that you really cannot afford. Don't do it. It's not going to help your case anymore. And in fact, it will end up bankrupting you.
But how will I know if I can afford this attorney or not?
So I use a good rule of thumb. Most lawyers, when you meet with them, will tell you, here's kind of an estimate of my retainer. They won't tell you, here's how much your cost is going to, here's how much your case is going to cost. What they will say is, it's $5,000 for a retainer. So think to yourself, okay, am I already shifting in my seat with the $5,000 retainer? Because realistically, it's very rare for your case from top to bottom to be completed within the retainer amount. So you should know that going in. If you're one of the few who's able to get your divorce finalized within the retainer, kudos to you. But for most people, that's really to get things kickstarted. So a great rule of thumb, can I afford this person, is think about the retainer times 3, meaning I should at least have access to cash or credit or some funding to at least cover 3, ideally 4 times the initial retainer. So if you're quoting me a $5,000 retainer, I want to make sure that I have readily available cash or some sort of credit available for at least $15,000 to $20,000. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all the divorce is going to cost, nor does it mean that that's what it will cost. But at least you have in your mind, okay, if we hit $15,000, if we hit $20,000, I know that I have that kind of readily available. And so it also really kind of reels in your own expectations about what these numbers really mean, because it goes very quickly. And so if you're very uncomfortable about the notion of spending 20, 30, $40,000, then from the very beginning, you want to be realistic about what's this retainer, what's the hourly rate, and if I were to extrapolate this over several months, is this something that I can comfortably afford?
I certainly advise people to have at least two, if not three, conversations with different attorneys before they hire someone. Because that first attorney that you can talk to, not only on the financial stuff, but just on how you relate to one another and how they approach the issues that you have in your case, you're going to have a feeling with that first attorney. And you might think that that attorney is a great fit. But then you go on and have that second conversation with a different attorney or a third attorney. And all of a sudden you realize, oh gosh, that first attorney was very nice and I could have worked with them. But attorney number three is someone who I really connect with. Or now that I've had these three conversations, I understand more about the process. And I think this third attorney really is offering something that better meets my needs.
Absolutely. Here's the great thing to do. Do a pros and cons list, right? So if someone refers you to an attorney, go meet with them, but write down, here are all of the things that I like about this attorney. I like that it was a big firm. I like that it was a referral. What don't I like? Well, not really sure that based on, the hourly rate makes me a little anxious and uncomfortable about the numbers. Or I didn't feel like they really heard me when we were going through things. Now we go and we meet with lawyer two. Lawyer two, same thing, same chart. Here are the things I liked. Here are the things that I'm not so sure about, because now you can compare things. The other thing that you want to try to do, if your initial meeting with somebody was, say, at a mid-sized firm, right? A good thing to do would be to look at what is a smaller firm? What is a solo practitioner? Or what would it be like if I worked with someone who's at a larger firm? Because then now you can see all of the different variables. It's really important to do that. And here's the reality. In some cases, you just don't have time, right? You were served today or there's an emergency happening. And so you kind of have to make the decision right away. That's okay. But if you do have the time, then use it wisely and find somebody that really does hit more of the pros than the cons, because now I've now had the opportunity to really kind of check out very different people to find what works for me. Very quick end on that though, finding somebody that you think you want may not always be the right person for you. So people often jump to, I want a bulldog. I want somebody super aggressive. That's the fastest way to spend a lot of money, because what you're saying is settlement is not an option. Because when you're hiring somebody and their job is to be aggressive, their job is to go into court and to take very aggressive positions, then you are saying, I'm ready to spend the money. So be mindful of what you're saying that you're looking for, but also you have to know being an aggressive attorney isn't easy to turn on and turn off. So their aggressiveness may come back to you as well. And if your personality is not one that can handle that level of pressure or that level of tone in the relationship, then maybe they're not actually the person for you. That's really important to keep in mind.
Okay, so we've talked about a few ways that we can save money on legal fees. I want to ask you, what is the way that we can save the largest amount of money in our divorce case? If I was looking for the best way to really cut back the costs in a major way, what would you say that is?
Stay out of court at all costs. The way to do that would be through settlement and negotiation. A great method is mediation. So mediation is an alternative dispute resolution process where participants, so the clients, can go with or without lawyers to try to problem solve to resolve the issues. It puts that individual and their soon-to-be ex or the co-parent squarely in the middle of the decision-making process. You have control over the process and the outcome. That's a great way. And in my humble opinion, as a mediator, the first stop, if you really are interested in trying to move through the divorce process, it's a great cost-saving mechanism because, again, you're staying out of court. You've got control over the outcome and the agreements. And we know that in most cases that are resolved through mediation, you then don't find yourself back in court later on. And so mediation is a great way, and I would probably say the best way to save money. But if mediation is not an option for you, then certainly the next best thing would be to work with your lawyer on how we want to strategize our settlement and how we want to navigate the divorce process with the intention of staying out of court, except if we have to. So it should be the, last resort in all ways, and communicating that to your lawyer will certainly help you spend money. Here's the thing. If the lawyer that you're working with, if their response is, no, we've got to go into court, this has to be in court, there's no other way to do it, then maybe this isn't the person for you if you're feeling as though there are other options. Staying out of court is the number one way to save money.
So staying out of court is the biggest way to save money in the divorce. Are
Yes.
there other big ways that you can offer to our listeners to save money in their divorces?
Absolutely. So a little bit earlier, I was talking about reviewing your bills. Here's what's really important. This is your divorce. And so you should be actively involved in your divorce. What does that mean? What it means is you should be reading the emails. You should be reading the drafts that are sent to you. You should be asking questions when you don't understand something, because those are the things that, one, are going to let your lawyer know, hey, I've got a client who's actively involved, who's paying attention, which is great, but also who's going to keep the case moving forward. And so being actively involved in your case can actually save money. But here's the caveat. Being actively involved doesn't mean that every hour you're calling, you're emailing, you're, showing up unannounced. This is a business and let them do their job. However, making sure that when you are engaging, you get to the point. Here are the questions that I have that are legal in nature, because we've already said, go talk to your therapist about the emotional side of things, or work with a divorce coach to help you bridge that gap. Making sure that you read and understand those things that are being sent out on your behalf, because once it's gone to the lawyer or to your soon-to-be ex-spouse, remember, they are going to respond, which oftentimes means you're responding. So make sure you read and you understand what's being sent out, whether it's a court filing or a letter. You can save a lot of money by being actively engaged and involved in your case.
Kimberly, the advice you gave us today could literally save thousands of dollars in legal fees. Now, if people want to find you because they potentially want to talk about mediation services, or they're interested in grown girl divorce and all the resources you have there, how would people find you?
Best way to find me, to work with me, whether it's a divorce coach for prenuptial or postnuptial agreements, or even mediation services, would be to go to the Grown Girl Divorce website and look at our services. you can reach out and we can certainly figure out a way for us to work together. You can also follow me on social media at Grown Girl Divorce, as well as checking out the podcast Grown Girl Divorce, which is on all podcast players. So would love to connect with individuals who are going through this process at any stage of the process. I'm happy to be a resource.
Thanks again for being here, Kimberly.
Thank you for having me.